I'm Mark Fleming-Williams, economy analyst at Stratfor, and today I'm joined by Lili, Eurasia analyst, to discuss recent events in Hungary. So Lili, representatives of far-right groups were planning to meet in Hungary on October the 3rd. The conference was banned by the Hungarian government, but some representatives turned up anyway, and one was arrested. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about who are these representatives and what they were trying to achieve.
So, although the conference was officially banned by the Hungarian government a few days before the event took place, about 80 people from 14 different countries showed up, and they did have some speeches and did get to network. So the conference was originally planned by a group which is based in Montana. It's a far-right U.S. white nationalist group led by a man called Richard Spetzer, who is a kind of rising star in some far-right circles here in the United States. Although he is an American white nationalist, he does have ties to some foreign groups, including some Russian nationalist groups. And the idea behind this conference, which his organization was really behind, was to bring together groups from the United States, Russia, Western and Eastern Europe to talk about, how they can network and connect as different far-right groups. But the interesting thing is that although all of these are far-right groups, they're very diverse. So there are really four types of groups which were invited to this conference. The first, like the National Policy Institute in Montana, is an American white nationalist group. But other groups, especially from Western Europe, are actually from the identitarian movement. And the identitarian movement is mostly made up of young people in places like France, mostly students, who subscribe to nationalist ideas, but also focus on this pan-European white identity. So they're a bit different from the white nationalists in the United States. And then we also have groups from Eastern and Central Europe, such as Hungary's Jobbik. And Jobbik, unlike the identitarians, is more focused on traditional kind of nationalism, specifically, Hungarian nationalism and Hungarian history. That is really their focus. So although Jobbik, like the identitarians in places like France, does try to appeal to young people, their ideology is a bit different. And then finally, the conference also invited figures from the Russian nationalist movement, specifically Alexander Dugin, who is a Russian nationalist philosopher and also an advisor to the chairman of the Russian State Duma. So we had all of these diverse groups planning to come to Budapest to share their experiences organizing in the far right and also to share their ideologies. They do have some commonalities despite these different backgrounds. So they tend to be anti-establishment, they tend to be anti-American, and they tend to be disillusioned with European institutions.
So considering the fact that these parties all came from America, Europe, Russia, Hungary would seem to be quite a sensible place to meet because it's so central. Was there another reason why they chose Hungary? And also, are we surprised that the Hungarians banned the meeting?
Right. So Hungary was chosen because of the electoral and political success of the Jobbik party. So in the 2010 parliamentary elections, Jobbik won about 16% of the popular vote, and in 2014 it won about 20% of the popular vote. So in terms of far-right parties in Europe, it is probably one of the most electorally successful. It also has a role in local politics, with Jobbik holding some mayoral positions in Hungarian villages. So it's very influential in Hungarian politics and in a way can be seen as a role model for some of the other far-right movements in other parts of Europe and even in the United States, which have never really gotten off the ground. For example, the identitarian groups are not represented in parliaments in Western Europe.
Interesting. Okay. So we've tied this into Hungarian politics and the rise of Jobbik. Does it tie into the rise of parties such as UKIP and the Front National, which we've seen across Europe? These kind of political but anti-establishment parties, often with anti-immigration attached as well. Can we tie the far-right meetings into the rise of these political parties?
Absolutely. So, although these far right parties, which were represented or planning to be represented in the conference in Budapest, don't have formal ties to parties such as the National Front in France, they do support them at times. So, for example, in France, the identitarian movement has actively supported Marine Le Pen. So, although these groups are not formally involved in politics in Western Europe, they do have influence in terms of the members that they bring and the political support that they bring to parties such as National Front. And one thing we've seen with some of these far-right groups is that even when they're not in government, they do influence policy, just like UKIP pulls the Conservative Party sometimes to the right and puts more pressure on conservative governments to change their policies.
So basically, for as long as we see these anti-establishment, anti-immigration parties remaining prevalent in Europe, we can expect to see more of this kind of far-right activity perhaps coming together in conferences.
Absolutely. So the significant thing about this particular conference is that it was meant to bring together all these different strands in the United States, Russia, and Europe. And over the past few years, and this is something that Stratfor has written about several times and chronicled, we've seen a trend of Russia trying to build relationships with far-right groups in Europe. And right now, at a time when Russia's relationship with the European Union is at a crossroads, and at a time when Russia is vying for the European Union to lift some of its sanctions, which were imposed due to the crisis in Ukraine, Russia and the Kremlin especially is really trying to use every lever it has to influence policies in European capitals. And building and strengthening relationships with these far-right movements is yet another lever that the Kremlin can use to influence policy.
Thank you very much for your time today, Lili. For more information on this, please visit the Stratfor website.